Next, I'm going to ask Jim Walker from the University of Waterloo History Department to share his work with us. Jim came to my notice many years ago through his first book on blacks in Nova Scotia. And he went on from that book to become a pioneer of the study of race relations in Canada. And some indeed say that Jim's work has been foundational for the study of race relations and Aboriginal history in Canada. He has done an immense amount of work over the years, forwarding the need for education in race relations and for advocating the position that rights are not a gift but a prize, something to be worked for and to be won. So Jim, thank you very much.
I'm afraid that Graham preempted my sum. I was going to say, well, first of all, I was going to thank everybody. This has been so much fun, very interesting, and some humbling too, I think. I'm going to move this out of the way so that I've got some space. If I stick precisely to my text, if I pull what you did, Tim, then I'll be waved down halfway through by our chair. Oops. So I'm going to, since I don't have anything fancy, I'll put my University of Waterloo 25-year watch on the hour, and then I know I can stick to the right time. Is this in the right place?
Yeah. Pull it over a bit. Thank you.
Okay. Most of my academic writing and teaching have been about individuals and minority groups who recognized that they were trapped in an unequal relationship with the larger society and who articulated a change in that relationship through claiming a right to equality. This isn't always successful, but when successful, it results in a human rights innovation. Today, I'm taking as my example of this process a person, Burnley Jones, and his group, the African Canadian community of Nova Scotia. Jones may be familiar to some of you as, now if you only made the lectern higher, you see, all our problems would have been solved. He may be familiar to some of you, depending on your age, as Rocky Jones, Rocky the Revolutionary, as the Globe and Mail called him, Canada's Stokely Carmichael, according to the Toronto Star. I first met this Rocky Jones at a student demonstration in Toronto in 1965 in support of the American Civil Rights Movement organized by the Friends of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and by the Student Union for Peace Action, SUPA. Rocky was the only black person present, and within minutes of his arrival, the newspaper and radio reporters had microphones in his face. Now, Rocky knew very little about the American situation, so he changed the topic to his own community in Nova Scotia. Though I had studied history at the University of Toronto, no disrespect for my colleagues, I was unaware of the blacks in Nova Scotia. Rocky's comments were enlightening and inspirational. I later planned to pursue their history at grad school, which I did at Dalhousie beginning in 1968. After that 1965 demonstration, SUPA sponsored Rocky's return to Nova Scotia to launch something called the Nova Scotia Project. He was to work with black youth in Halifax to engage them in defining their own issues and problems and in designing and implementing solutions. It was in accord with SUPA's participatory New Left paradigm. For almost 200 years before this, the black community had been struggling with racist disadvantage. Because they were a small minority, isolated in segregated settlements, politically powerless and economically dependent, they quite understandably adopted a strategy of gradual change, collaborating with sympathetic whites rather than confronting their oppressors. In 1945, the Reverend W.P. Oliver founded the Nova Scotia Association for the Advancement of Colored People to press for jobs, education, and housing. Their understanding of the race problem was that a few prejudiced individuals, rotten apples, were responsible for the discrimination they faced. The barrel was sound. The objective was to restrain those rotten apples and allow black people to rise to their rightful place in society. Rocky's return changed that dynamic, partly because of his charismatic personality, partly his New Left orientation, and partly his analytical imagination. He began to see that the old tactics perhaps solved a specific case, but it would immediately be replaced with another case. He was developing an understanding that the barrel itself was rotten, that the real problem was systemic and would require systemic solutions. There's an NFB film which you can download free, Encounter at Quacha House, where you can see this process actually occurring. It was made in 1967, and Quacha House was the center Rocky established for his programs. Rocky says to the camera, "If you can teach these kids that the system is racist, you can make some real changes." This was occurring in the context of the emergence of black power in the United States and race riots in northern US cities. Locally, Africville was being destroyed without significant protest from the adult black leadership and their white liberal allies. Rocky's message of directly confronting white power and demanding a new relationship smacked of what was happening south of the border. He was perceived as a threat, a radical, both by the black and white establishments. Rocky carried his message not to the power brokers, but to the people, both black and white, emphasizing that blacks had to articulate their own grievances before they could overcome them. By this time, I was in Halifax myself, and I often participated with him in these meetings. He told white audiences that they were part of the problem and invited them to join in a new structure of racial equality. He invited Stokely Carmichael to Halifax, and he came, staying in Rocky's home. More Black Panthers followed. The perceived threat became intense. At a black family meeting in November 1968, attended by some of the Panthers, the community formed a Black United Front to be composed of representatives from every black settlement to mobilize the entire black population and to give strength to their confrontation with white authorities. The confrontation, the perceived threat, paid off. Human rights policies and practices did not change overnight, but an entirely new track was followed thereafter in which governments acknowledged the existence of racial inequality and black people were involved as part of their normal rights as citizens. In place of the former reactive tactics, an organic and proactive process has been created, and it continues still. The systemic approach has become commonplace today in Canadian human rights and equity policies. My point is not that Rocky's personal influence prevailed, but that the current thrust of our human rights policies arose first in an oppressed community. Rocky and I, along with black poet and scholar George Elliott Clarke, began to research a book on the black movement in Canada and Rocky's role in it. Tragically, Rocky died of heart failure in July of this year. George and I will continue, and that's why I'm making him my topic today. George and I will continue with the book, not just as a tribute to our friend, but as an example and an inspiration for how innovations in human rights and social justice can be accomplished. That should be about 7 minutes.